The crystal chandeliers of Lord Pembroke's ballroom cast a golden glow over London's most privileged aristocrats, their laughter rising to the ornate ceiling like champagne bubbles. Yet in the corner of this opulent gathering stood Lady Eliza Worthington, her modest blue dress faded from too many careful washings, her chestnut hair simply arranged by her own hands rather than by a lady's maid. She clutched her small beaded reticule, trying to make herself invisible among the potted palms as the glittering crowd parted for the evening's most anticipated arrival. The Duke of Ravenscroft, Sebastian Blackwood, entered with the confident stride of a man who had never known want, his imposing 6-foot frame clad in impeccable black evening attire that contrasted sharply with his reputation for coldness. The ladies fluttered their fans in unison, whispering behind gloved hands about his vast fortune and the mysterious circumstances of his broken engagement 2 seasons ago. Eliza had not intended to attend tonight's festivities, but her father, Lord William Worthington, with creditors pounding at their door, had insisted she accept her cousin Victoria's invitation. "Perhaps you'll catch the eye of a gentleman with means," he had suggested, not meeting her gaze, the weight of their family's mounting debts evident in the slump of his shoulders. What her father failed to understand was that Eliza, with her unfashionable figure and lack of dowry, had long ago accepted her fate as an eventual governess or companion. She had attended Oxford's Lady Margaret Hall in secret, her intelligence her only true asset, though one not valued in the marriage market, where a trim waist and family connections determined a woman's worth. The night deteriorated rapidly when Victoria, resplendent in a gown of emerald silk that cost more than Eliza's entire wardrobe, dragged her reluctant cousin toward the Duke's circle, where a game of wagers had commenced among the intoxicated gentlemen. "My dear cousin claims she can turn any man's head with her unique qualities," Victoria announced, her smile sharp as a stiletto. "Perhaps your Grace would care to test this assertion." The Duke's steel-grey eyes, previously bored, now swept over Eliza with clinical detachment, taking in her unfashionable attire and the proud tilt of her chin that betrayed her discomfort. A muscle twitched in his jaw as he recognized the malicious game being played at this plain young woman's expense. What happened next would haunt Eliza's dreams for months to come. The Duke snapped his fingers for his footman, who appeared with a large box of polished cherrywood. "If the lady can fit into this gown by the spring ball," Sebastian announced, lifting a magnificent creation of ivory silk and seed pearls from its nest of tissue paper, "then I shall marry her on the spot." The assembled crowd gasped, then erupted in cruel laughter. For the dress was notoriously small, crafted for his former fiancée, the willowy Lady Caroline, whose tragic riding accident had left the Duke a bitter shell of a man. "What say you, Miss Worthington?" he challenged, his voice cutting through the din of titters and whispers. "Do you accept my generous offer?" Eliza's face burned with humiliation, but as she looked at her cousin's triumphant smirk and thought of her father's desperate situation, something hardened within her. With trembling hands but steady voice, she stepped forward and accepted the box, knowing full well that the Duke had just publicly mocked her fuller figure and modest circumstances. What Sebastian Blackwood could not know was that beneath her unremarkable exterior beat the heart of a woman whose determination had survived far worse than the scorn of a wounded aristocrat. As she left the ballroom with the precious cargo, whispers followed her like persistent shadows, but Eliza held her head high. The Duke might have intended this as a jest, but she would transform his cruelty into her salvation. Little did anyone suspect that this night would set in motion events that would shake London society to its foundations, forcing both a proud Duke and a humble lady to confront truths about themselves that neither was prepared to face. For the dress that symbolized Eliza's humiliation would become the catalyst for a transformation that would bring a powerful man to his knees in ways that wealth and title had never prepared him for. The Worthington family's diminished circumstances had not always been their reality. Once respected members of society, their downfall had begun with speculation in shipping ventures gone awry and Lord William's subsequent attempts to recover their losses through increasingly desperate investments. Eliza had watched her mother fade away under the strain, taking to her bed with mysterious ailments that required expensive tonics, until consumption finally claimed her 3 winters ago. The grand house in Mayfair had been sold, their country estate mortgaged to the hilt, and now father and daughter occupied a modest townhouse in an unfashionable corner of London, where creditors knew to call during tea time when the household was certain to be in residence to save the expense of going out. Sebastian Blackwood's path to becoming the Duke of Ravenscroft had been paved with tragedy rather than poverty. The sole surviving son after his elder brother drowned in a boating accident and his father succumbed to heart failure shortly thereafter, he had ascended to the dukedom at 26 with a fortune that made him one of England's wealthiest bachelors. His engagement to Lady Caroline Sutton, daughter of the Earl of Westmoreland, had seemed the perfect alliance until her betrayal was discovered, a secret affair with his closest friend, Lord Thomas Harrington. Before Sebastian could confront them, fate intervened with Caroline's riding accident, which some whispered had been no accident at all. The scandal had been carefully contained, but Sebastian's heart had calcified around the twin wounds of betrayal and guilt, rendering him cold to all but his mother, the formidable Dowager Duchess Constance. The morning after Lord Pembroke's ball, Eliza spread the infamous dress across her bed, its lustrous ivory fabric catching the weak winter sunlight filtering through the curtains. Miss Margaret Brown, Maggie to her few friends, Eliza's companion since their school days, circled the gown with a critical eye. "It's not impossible," she declared, pinching the fabric between experienced fingers. "The seam allowances are generous, and the side panels could be replaced entirely with something similar." Eliza's mind, sharpened by years of independent study, was already calculating possibilities. She would not merely alter the dress, she would remake it as surely as she intended to remake her destiny. The Duke's cruel wager had unintentionally given her something precious, time and a purpose. For 3 months, Eliza worked tirelessly by candlelight, her fingers raw from countless tiny stitches, unpicking delicate seams and ingeniously restructuring the gown to accommodate her figure while maintaining its original splendor. During daylight hours, she took on translation work secretly, earning just enough to purchase matching silk and to keep their household afloat. Her father, lost in his own regrets and schemes, barely noticed her preoccupation, assuming she was engaged in typical feminine pursuits. The dress became more than fabric and thread. It transformed into Eliza's silent rebellion against a society that valued her so little and a man who had used her as the object of public ridicule. What Eliza could never have anticipated was what she found carefully hidden in the dress's elaborate bodice, a small packet of letters written in a feminine hand, addressed to Lord Thomas Harrington and signed with Lady Caroline's initials. As she unfolded the yellowed pages with trembling fingers, Eliza realized she held the truth of the Duke's past in her hands, the evidence of his fiancée's betrayal that had never come to light. Suddenly, the cruel wager took on new dimensions. The dress wasn't simply a tool of humiliation, it was the physical embodiment of Sebastian Blackwood's deepest wound, one he carried like an invisible scar beneath his cold exterior. For the first time since that terrible night, Eliza felt something besides anger toward the Duke, a surprising flicker of understanding. Winter yielded to spring's first tentative blossoms, and with the changing season came an unexpected development. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenscroft, having heard rumors of the scandalous wager her son had made, arrived unannounced at the Worthington residence one misty April morning. Eliza, her hair hastily pinned and her simple morning dress smudged with chalk from marking alterations, found herself face to face with one of England's most formidable matriarchs. The Dowager Duchess, her spine as straight as the ebony walking stick she carried despite appearing not to need it, regarded Eliza with shrewd blue eyes, so like her son's. "So you are the young woman who has accepted my son's foolish challenge," she stated, settling uninvited into the threadbare armchair by the fireplace. "I find myself curious about someone who would face such public scrutiny rather than retreat with what little dignity remained." What followed was not the dressing down Eliza had expected, but a probing conversation that felt more like a military commander assessing a potential officer. By the time the Duchess departed 2 hours later, she had extracted Eliza's life story, educational background, and current circumstances with the precision of a skilled surgeon, and had left behind an invitation to take tea at Ravenscroft House the following week. The Duke, meanwhile, had all but forgotten his impulsive wager until his mother mentioned her visit to the Worthington girl. "You will cease this childish behavior immediately," the Duchess commanded over dinner in their cavernous dining room. The footman dismissed to ensure privacy. "Either withdraw the challenge with a public apology and suitable compensation for the young lady's humiliation, or prepare to honor your word should she succeed." Sebastian's fork clattered against fine china as he looked up in shock. No one had taken the wager seriously. It had been a moment of drunken cruelty, fueled by bitter memories the emerald gown had evoked of Lady Victoria's cousin. Lady Victoria herself had orchestrated the entire scene, playing on his well-known aversion to fortune hunters to provoke his worst instincts. "She cannot possibly succeed," he replied dismissively, though a seed of discomfort had been planted. His mother's raised eyebrow spoke volumes about her opinion of his conduct. "Then you have nothing to fear from inviting her to ride tomorrow. I've already arranged it." And so began a series of carefully orchestrated, accidental meetings between the Duke and Eliza. Morning rides in the park where his mother conveniently developed a headache, requiring Sebastian to accompany Miss Worthington alone. Literary discussions in the Ravenscroft Library where the Duchess excused herself to attend to correspondence. Sebastian initially maintained a glacial formality, addressing Eliza with minimal courtesy while scanning her figure for signs of progress with the gown, an assessment that brought heat to her cheeks, but which she endured with quiet dignity. What gradually eroded his indifference were their conversations. Eliza's insightful comments about Wordsworth's latest publication, her surprisingly informed views on agricultural improvements, her gentle but genuine affection for her troubled father. Against his will, Sebastian began to see beyond the unfashionable exterior to the sharp mind and unbroken spirit beneath. Eliza, for her part, found her initial righteous anger softening into something more complex. She observed how Sebastian's features relaxed when discussing his estate innovations, the flash of unexpected humor when recounting his childhood scrapes, the gentle way he steadied his mother on uneven garden paths despite their frequent battles of will. The man behind the cruel Duke began to emerge in these unguarded moments, a man wounded by betrayal rather than born to cruelty. The letters hidden in Caroline's dress remained Eliza's secret, tucked away in her writing desk beneath her journal. Some nights she removed them, reading the damning evidence of Caroline's duplicity by candlelight, wondering if revealing their existence would bring Sebastian peace or merely reopen barely healed wounds. The knowledge created an intimacy he was unaware of. Eliza understood his pain in ways no one else could, carrying his secret like a precious, dangerous coal against her heart. By the time May arrived with its explosion of flowers and social obligations, Lady Victoria had become aware of her cousin's regular appearances at Ravenscroft House. The beautiful socialite, whose own ambitions regarding the Duke had been transparent since her debut, engineered an encounter with Eliza after Sunday services. "How charming that the Duke's mother has taken up a charity case," she remarked, her smile venomous beneath her fashionable bonnet. "Though you mustn't mistake pity for acceptance, dear cousin. The wager was a moment's amusement, nothing more. No one expects you to appear at the spring ball, least of all in that dress." Her words were calculated to wound, but Eliza, strengthened by months of purpose and unexpected allies, merely smiled. "Then I shall enjoy surprising you," she replied, turning away from Victoria's narrowed gaze with a serenity she had fought hard to earn. The exchange was witnessed by Sebastian himself, standing in the shadow of an ancient oak, and the flash of admiration in his eyes would have astonished Eliza had she seen it. 1 week before the spring ball, Sebastian found himself uncharacteristically restless, pacing the length of his private study like a caged predator. The wager that had begun as a moment of drunken cruelty had evolved into an uncomfortable moral quandary. His mother's pointed remarks about honor and his growing, though reluctantly acknowledged, respect for Eliza Worthington had created a knot of guilt that tightened with each passing day. When his butler announced Miss Worthington's unexpected arrival, requesting a brief audience, Sebastian's heart performed a treacherous leap that he immediately suppressed. She was shown into his study, rain-dampened and flushed from her journey, a small wooden box clutched in gloved hands. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace," she began, her voice steadier than her pulse. But I've discovered something that rightfully belongs to you." Without further explanation, she placed the box on his desk and stepped back, her eyes never leaving his face as he cautiously opened it. Inside lay the packet of Caroline's letters to Thomas Harrington, damning evidence of their betrayal that had remained hidden until Eliza's meticulous work on the dress had revealed their secret compartment. The color drained from Sebastian's face as he recognized his former fiancée's elegant script, his fingers hovering above the yellowed pages as though they might burn him. "Where did you find these?" he asked, his voice a harsh whisper in the book-lined room. Eliza explained the hidden pocket in the bodice of the dress, how the letters had fallen into her lap one night as she reworked the seams. "I debated whether to bring them to you," she admitted, her hands clasped tightly before her. "They confirm what you may have suspected but perhaps could never prove." Sebastian sank into his chair, the weight of vindication unexpectedly heavy on his shoulders. For 2 years he had carried the burden of uncertainty. Had Caroline truly betrayed him? Had his suspicions driven her to that fatal ride? The letters answered the first question definitively, though the second would forever remain between Caroline and her maker. When he finally looked up, the naked vulnerability in his expression caught Eliza unprepared. "You could have kept this secret," he observed quietly. "Used it to secure your position." The implication was clear. Many women would have wielded such knowledge as a weapon, ensuring his compliance in their impending marriage should she win the wager. "I would not build a future on such a foundation," Eliza replied simply. "Neither secrets nor coercion make for stable ground between two people." In that moment, something fundamental shifted between them. Sebastian saw not the unfashionable spinster he had mockingly challenged, but a woman of principle whose worth had nothing to do with the dress she might or might not fit into by the ball. He rose abruptly, moving to the window to conceal the unexpected moisture in his eyes. "The wager was cruel and beneath me," he admitted, his back to her as rain streaked the glass, mirroring the tracks of emotions he refused to display. "I release you from it. You need not appear at the ball, and I shall ensure your father's debts are settled as compensation for my behavior." His offer, generous by any standard, hung in the air between them, a path to mutual freedom. Eliza's response was not what he expected. "I decline your release," she stated, causing him to turn in surprise. "Not because I harbor illusions about marriage to a man who does not want me, but because I have worked too hard to surrender now. I will appear at the ball in that dress, Your Grace. I will fulfill my part of this bargain, not for your hand but for my own satisfaction." Her eyes held his steadily, revealing a spirit that had been forged in hardship rather than broken by it. "After that, we shall both be free of this obligation." Sebastian found himself speechless, accustomed to deference rather than defiance. Before he could formulate a response, Eliza curtsied and withdrew, leaving him alone with Caroline's betrayal finally confirmed and an unexpected admiration for the woman, who had brought him both pain and clarity in equal measure. That night, alone in her bedchamber, Eliza completed the final stitches on the transformed gown, her candle burning low as dawn approached. The dress that had once symbolized her humiliation now represented something entirely different, her refusal to be defined by others' expectations or limitations. Whether Sebastian honored the wager or not had become almost immaterial. She would appear at the ball not as an object of ridicule, but as a woman who had overcome both circumstance and cruelty through her own resourcefulness. As she finally laid down her needle, exhausted but triumphant, Eliza allowed herself to acknowledge the inconvenient truth she had been avoiding. Somewhere during these strange months of antagonism and gradually dawning respect, her heart had betrayed her by developing feelings for the complex wounded man behind the Duke's cold facade. She extinguished her candle with a decisive breath. Such sentimentality was a luxury she could ill afford. The ball would be an ending, not a beginning, a chance to reclaim her dignity before retreating to the modest but respectable future she had always expected. The night of the Ravenscroft Spring Ball arrived with a perfect May evening, stars emerging like diamonds scattered across black velvet as carriages lined the curved driveway of London's most anticipated social event. Inside the mansion, thousands of candles transformed the ballroom into a glittering wonderland, massive arrangements of spring blossoms perfuming the air as the orchestra tuned their instruments behind a screen of potted palms. Sebastian stood at the entrance of the grand staircase, mechanically greeting the parade of aristocrats and social climbers, while his thoughts remained fixed on the one arrival he both dreaded and inexplicably anticipated. His mother had positioned herself strategically nearby, her shrewd gaze missing nothing as she catalogued each interaction with the precision of a general surveying battlefield positions. When Lord William Worthington was announced, arriving conspicuously alone, whispers rippled through the assembled guests. Sebastian's jaw tightened as Victoria Pembroke's tinkling laugh reached his ears. "It seems your little challenge has been forfeited, Your Grace," she commented loudly enough to ensure neighboring conversations faltered. "How disappointing for those of us anticipating the entertainment." The Dowager Duchess's cutting glance silenced further remarks, but Sebastian felt a surge of unexpected disappointment mingled with concern. Had Eliza succumbed to public pressure, deciding that dignity in absence was preferable to potential humiliation in attendance? He was contemplating sending a footman to inquire after her welfare when the major domo's resonant voice cut through the murmured conversations. "Lady Eliza Worthington." A collective intake of breath swept through the ballroom as all eyes turned toward the grand staircase. There she stood, a vision that bore little resemblance to the Eliza who had defiantly accepted his challenge months ago. The infamous ivory dress had been transformed into something entirely new, yet unmistakably original. Its elegant lines now perfectly accommodated her figure while maintaining the design's intrinsic beauty. Pearl beading caught the candlelight as she descended the stairs with quiet confidence, her chestnut hair arranged in a sophisticated style that softened her features. But it was not merely the dress or coiffure that transformed her. The months of purpose had bestowed a grace and self-possession that commanded attention more effectively than conventional beauty ever could. Sebastian found himself moving forward involuntarily, drawn as if by an unseen force to meet her at the bottom of the staircase. The ballroom had fallen silent, hundreds of eyes following his progress with avid curiosity. When he reached Eliza, the vulnerability in her eyes belied her composed exterior, reminding him forcefully of their last private encounter in his study. Without planning the gesture, Sebastian executed a formal bow of the kind typically reserved for royalty, a public acknowledgement that sent shockwaves through the watching crowd. "You have honored your commitment admirably, Lady Eliza," he said, his voice carrying in the hushed room. "May I request the honor of the first dance?" He extended his hand, aware that this simple action was already transforming drawing-room gossip across London. Eliza's fingers were cool against his palm, as she accepted with a graceful curtsy, her pulse fluttering visibly at her throat. As he led her to the center of the ballroom, the orchestra began a waltz that would forever after resonate with this moment in both their memories. They moved together with surprising harmony, Sebastian's natural grace complementing Eliza's carefully practiced steps. "You seem startled by my appearance, Your Grace," she observed quietly, a hint of the defiant spirit he had come to admire sparkling beneath her composure. "Did you truly believe I would not come?" Sebastian's grip tightened imperceptibly on her waist as they turned beneath the crystal chandeliers. "I believed you might choose dignity over satisfaction," he admitted. "Few would have blamed you." The corner of her mouth curved upward. "Then you still do not know me well despite our many conversations. I finish what I begin." As the music continued, they fell into a rhythm that required no further words, each acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes tracking their progress and the significance of this public display. Lady Victoria's face had contorted into barely concealed fury, while the Dowager Duchess observed the scene with calculated approval. Lord William Worthington, initially alarmed by his daughter's entrance, now stood straighter, as he noted the respect in the Duke's manner toward Eliza. When the music concluded, Sebastian did not immediately release her hand, instead guiding Eliza toward the terrace doors that opened onto the moonlit gardens. The night air provided welcome coolness after the heated ballroom, the fragrance of roses surrounding them as they paused beside a marble fountain. "You have won our wager fairly," Sebastian stated, his voice low and serious in the relative privacy. "I am prepared to honor my commitment if that is what you wish." Eliza studied his aristocratic features, seeing the complex man who had emerged through their interactions rather than the cruel duke who had issued the challenge. "I did not come tonight to claim a reluctant bridegroom," she replied evenly. "I came to prove something to myself, and perhaps to you as well. The wager is satisfied by my appearance. No further obligation exists on either side." She made to move past him, her piece said with dignity, but Sebastian's hand caught hers, preventing her departure. The unexpected vulnerability in his expression halted her more effectively than his grasp. "And if I wish the obligation to exist?" he asked, the carefully constructed walls of his reserve crumbling visibly. "If these months have revealed that my cruelty masked fear, and your determination has shown me what true courage looks like." Eliza stood perfectly still, moonlight silvering her features as she balanced on the knife edge between protecting her heart and risking everything for a chance at genuine happiness. Before Eliza could respond, Lady Victoria appeared at the terrace doorway, her emerald gown catching the moonlight as she approached with deliberate steps. "How touching," she interrupted, malice thinly veiled beneath feigned concern. "But surely, cousin, you don't imagine a momentary fascination will overcome years of social expectation. The Duke requires a suitable duchess, not a charity project." She turned to Sebastian with practiced coquettishness. "Your mother is looking for you, Your Grace. The Countess of Harborough has arrived with her daughter." The intrusion shattered the fragile moment between Sebastian and Eliza, reality crashing back with Victoria's calculated reminder of their vastly different social positions. Sebastian's expression hardened as he regarded Victoria with newfound clarity. "How fortunate that I am perfectly capable of determining what I require without assistance, Lady Victoria," he replied coolly. "Please inform my mother I shall return shortly." The dismissal was unmistakable, but Victoria merely smiled, a predatory gleam in her eye as she glanced between them before retreating to the ballroom. Satisfaction evident in her posture. She had planted her poisonous seed of doubt and was content to let it germinate. The damage had been done. Eliza withdrew her hand from Sebastian's grasp, the warmth of possibility cooling rapidly as practical considerations reasserted themselves. "Lady Victoria speaks an uncomfortable truth, Your Grace," she said softly, deliberately reinstating the formality between them. "Our worlds are separated by more than a mere dress. You have obligations to your position that I cannot fulfill." Sebastian took a step toward her, frustration evident in the tense line of his jaw. "I believed you immune to society's shallow judgments," he challenged, a hint of the old arrogance surfacing in his tone. Eliza's chin lifted, her own pride awakening in response. "And I believed you would understand the difference between defying society for principle versus undermining your own position and authority. A duchess must command respect, not provide fodder for ridicule." The words fell between them like stones, building a wall neither had intended. With a curtsy that maintained her dignity while acknowledging the conversation's end, Eliza turned and walked with measured steps back toward the brilliantly lit ballroom, leaving Sebastian alone with the night-blooming flowers and his own conflicted thoughts. The remainder of the ball passed in a blur of formal dances and stilted conversation for Eliza. She accepted partners graciously, including her flustered father, who whispered urgent questions about her exchange with the Duke. "Nothing is settled," she assured him quietly, guiding his uncertain steps through the quadrille. "We shall continue as we have been." Sebastian, meanwhile, maintained his ducal obligations with rigid courtesy, opening the elaborate midnight supper with the Countess of Harborough's daughter, as tradition dictated, though his gaze repeatedly drifted to where Eliza sat between an elderly baron and a young naval lieutenant. The Dowager Duchess observed this pantomime with increasing impatience, her lorgnette tapping against her palm in a rhythm that signaled impending intervention. When the orchestra began the final set of dances before dawn, she maneuvered through the crowd with surprising agility for a woman of her years, arriving at her son's side just as he prepared to partner Lady Victoria for the cotillion. "Enough of this foolishness," the Duchess declared in an undertone that brooked no argument. "Your father would be ashamed of your cowardice." Sebastian's head snapped toward her, genuine surprise replacing his carefully maintained expression. "You have spent 2 years entombed with a ghost," his mother continued relentlessly. Now when a woman of genuine substance appears, one who challenges, rather than merely decorates your arm, you retreat behind convention. I did not raise my son to be a fool. Without awaiting his response, she turned imperiously to the young Viscount, who had just claimed Eliza's hand for the cotillion. "You will excuse Lady Eliza, Lord Hastings. The Duke requires her assistance with a matter of some urgency." The startled Viscount had no choice but to bow in acquiescence as the Dowager Duchess practically delivered Eliza into her son's arms before sweeping away, satisfaction evident in the set of her shoulders. Left face to face in the middle of the formation, Sebastian and Eliza regarded each other with mutual wariness as the opening strains of music began. "Your mother is a formidable tactician," Eliza observed, taking her position as the dance required. Sebastian's mouth quirked in reluctant amusement, a characteristic she apparently recognizes in you as well. The formal patterns of the dance separated them momentarily, providing space for reflection, before bringing them together again. As they joined hands for a promenade, Sebastian spoke quickly, urgency overcoming pride. "You were right about our different worlds," he conceded, "but wrong to believe you cannot navigate mine. I have watched you these past months, your intelligence, your adaptability, your unflinching courage in the face of cruelty. These qualities would serve a duchess far better than the superficial accomplishments society typically values." The music swelled as they separated again, the choreographed movements providing a counterpoint to the tumultuous emotions beneath their composed exteriors. When they next came together, Eliza's response surprised him. "It is not your world, I fear, Sebastian," she admitted, using his given name for the first time. "It is disappearing into it completely, becoming merely the Duke's wife rather than remaining myself." Her honesty hung between them as the dance continued, Sebastian's mind racing to understand this perspective, so different from what he had anticipated. As the cotillion concluded, Sebastian maintained his hold on Eliza's hand, an unmistakable signal to the vigilant onlookers that their interaction warranted continued attention. "Walk with me," he requested, his tone making it clear this was no casual invitation. Aware of the hundreds of eyes tracking their movement, Eliza allowed him to guide her toward the grand portrait gallery that adjoined the ballroom, a space where conversation could occur with marginally more privacy while remaining within the bounds of propriety. Marble busts of Blackwood ancestors lined the long chamber, their stone eyes seeming to assess this potential addition to their lineage as Sebastian led Eliza past generations of aristocratic faces. He paused beneath the imposing portrait of his father, the previous Duke, whose stern countenance dominated the center of the gallery. "I have spent my life attempting to fulfill expectations," Sebastian began, his voice low but intense. "To be worthy of the title, the responsibility, the legacy of centuries. When Caroline betrayed me, it was not merely my heart that suffered, but my confidence in my own judgment, in my ability to discern genuine worth from artifice. I retreated behind coldness because it was safer than risking further error." Eliza studied the portrait, noting the similarities between father and son, the same strong jaw, the same penetrating grey eyes. "And now?" she prompted gently when Sebastian fell silent, lost in remembrance. His focus returned to her, his gaze so direct it nearly took her breath away. "Now I find myself confronted by a woman who has never once performed to expectations, who instead consistently defies them by exceeding them in unexpected ways." His lips curved into a genuine smile, transforming his austere features. "You fear disappearing into my world, Eliza, but I am offering you the opportunity to transform it instead. Not as an ornament or a convenience, but as a partner whose perspective I have come to value precisely because it differs from my own and from those who surround me." He reached into his coat pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box that caused Eliza's pulse to quicken. "This belonged to my grandmother, a woman who published mathematical treatises under a male pseudonym, while simultaneously managing the estate during my grandfather's diplomatic service abroad. I believe she would have approved of you." Inside the box rested a ring unlike any Eliza had seen among the fashionable ladies of London. Not a traditional diamond solitaire, but an exquisite sapphire surrounded by small pearls in an unusual geometric setting. "I am not asking you to become someone different," Sebastian continued, his voice gaining confidence as he articulated thoughts that had crystallized only in this moment. I am asking for the privilege of supporting who you already are, with all your intelligence, principles, and uncommon courage. The question is not whether you would make a suitable duchess, that I already know, but whether I could be worthy of a wife who would challenge rather than merely compliment me. He did not drop to one knee as convention might dictate, but instead stood before her as an equal, the ring offered in an outstretched palm rather than presumptively placed upon her finger. This is not the fulfillment of a thoughtless wager, Eliza, but a deliberate choice. Will you consider becoming my wife, not out of obligation or advantage, but because together we might build something genuine from the ruins of our respective disappointments? The distant strains of music from the ballroom seemed to fade as Eliza looked from the ring to Sebastian's face, searching for any hint of reservation or doubt. Finding none, she allowed herself to acknowledge the feelings that had grown within her own heart, feelings she had stubbornly attributed to gratitude or proximity rather than the deeper attachment they truly represented. I will consider it on one condition, she replied, a hint of her characteristic forthrightness returning. That we establish from the beginning that while I shall respect your position and fulfill its obligations, I must maintain certain freedoms to continue my translations, to express opinions that may occasionally differ from yours, to be your partner in truth rather than merely in name. Her countenance softened as she continued, vulnerability showing through her composed exterior. I could not bear to live as an ornament, Sebastian. I have spent too long fighting to be seen for my mind, rather than measured by conventional standards of feminine worth. Sebastian closed his hand around the ring, a gesture of momentary withdrawal that sent an unexpected pang through Eliza's chest until she recognized the thoughtfulness in his expression. I propose an amendment to your condition, he said carefully, that we establish from the beginning that I not only permit but expect your continued intellectual pursuits, that I actively seek your differing opinions, and that our partnership be founded on mutual respect for our respective strengths. He reopened his palm, the sapphire catching the light from the gallery's chandeliers. I have had quite enough of ornamental women, Eliza. What I require, what I desire, is a woman whose inner qualities render external considerations secondary. Will you accept these terms? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities neither had dared contemplate when they had first crossed paths at Lord Pembroke's ball. Eliza's gloved fingers hovered above the ring, hesitation born not of uncertainty, but of the magnitude of the decision before her. This moment would alter the trajectory of both their lives irrevocably, a transformation as significant as the one she had wrought upon the dress that had brought them to this juncture. Before Eliza could respond, the sound of approaching voices shattered their private moment. The gallery doors swung open to admit a small crowd, led by Lady Victoria, who had apparently orchestrated this interruption with deliberate timing. "There you are, Your Grace," she called with artificial brightness. "Everyone is wondering where the host has disappeared to. The final dance is about to begin." Beside her stood Lord William Worthington, visibly uncomfortable at being pressed into service for Victoria's machinations, along with several curious members of the ton, clearly eager to witness any potential drama. Sebastian's jaw tightened at the intrusion, but years of social discipline prevented him from the sharp dismissal he might have preferred. Instead, he closed his fingers around the ring once more, slipping it discreetly back into his pocket as he turned to face the newcomers with aristocratic composure. "Lady Eliza has been kind enough to discuss some fascinating historical perspectives on the portraits," he stated smoothly. "We shall rejoin the gathering momentarily." Victoria's gaze darted between them, her shrewd assessment taking in their proximity and Eliza's flushed cheeks. "How educational," she remarked with thinly veiled sarcasm. "Though perhaps, cousin, you might consider your father's comfort before your own intellectual pursuits. He appears quite fatigued by the late hour." The subtle reminder of their family's dependent position was calculated to remind Eliza of her obligations and limitations. For a moment, the old Eliza might have acquiesced, allowing herself to be maneuvered by her cousin's social expertise and manipulation. But the woman who had remade the impossible dress had also remade herself in the process. Drawing herself up to her full height, Eliza addressed her cousin with quiet authority that nonetheless carried to every ear in the suddenly silent gallery. "How considerate of you to express concern, Victoria. I believe, however, that my father is quite capable of indicating when he requires my attendance." She turned to Lord Worthington with genuine warmth. "Are you well, father, or would you prefer to depart now?" Lord Worthington, startled by his daughter's unexpected poise in the face of Victoria's barbs, straightened his slightly stooped shoulders. "I am perfectly well, my dear," he replied, a note of pride entering his voice as he observed Eliza's transformation, not merely in appearance but in bearing. "In fact, the Duke has been kind enough to invite me to view his collection of first editions tomorrow. I find myself quite looking forward to it." This revelation, apparently news to Victoria, caused her triumphant expression to falter. Sebastian seized the moment with the decisiveness that had made him a formidable force in both business and social realms. "Indeed," he confirmed, moving to stand beside Eliza in a clear statement of alignment. Lord Worthington's expertise in early Renaissance texts will be invaluable in cataloguing recent acquisitions. The subtle elevation of Eliza's father from struggling debtor to respected scholar was not lost on the assembled onlookers, whose expressions registered varying degrees of surprise and recalculation. Victoria, sensing her position weakening, attempted one final gambit. "How delightful to see such intellectual compatibility," she commented, her tone suggesting the opposite. "Though one must wonder how the ton will receive a duchess whose background is so unconventional. The Ravenscroft legacy demands certain standards after all." The barb struck its intended target. Several of the older aristocrats exchanged meaningful glances, their expressions revealing the social prejudices that remained entrenched despite changing times. For a heartbeat, uncertainty flickered across Eliza's face, as the practical challenges of the future Sebastian had proposed crystallized before her. But it was Sebastian himself who responded, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the portrait gallery and beyond, where more guests had begun to gather at the commotion. "The Ravenscroft legacy," he declared, "has always valued substance over appearance, contribution over conformity. My grandfather married a merchant's daughter, whose dowry rebuilt estates damaged in the fire of '78. My great-aunt wed a diplomat whose lineage was unremarkable, but whose intelligence secured vital treaties during the American conflict." With deliberate movements that sent a ripple of shocked whispers through the growing audience, Sebastian reached into his pocket and withdrew the sapphire ring once more. This time, however, he did not offer it privately, but held it aloft where the chandelier light caught its facets, sending blue fire dancing across the marble busts of his ancestors. "The Ravenscroft legacy," he continued, his voice gaining strength, "will be honored rather than diminished by the addition of a woman whose character and intellect have proven equal to any challenge, including the thoughtless cruelty of a man who once believed wealth and title sufficient compensation for a cold heart." And then, in a gesture that would be recounted in drawing rooms across London for seasons to come, the Duke of Ravenscroft, Sebastian Blackwood, lowered himself to one knee before Eliza Worthington, social nobody and intellectual nobody knew what. His proud head bowed in genuine humility before the woman who had transformed not only his infamous dress, but his understanding of true worth. "Lady Eliza Worthington," he declared, the formality of his address contrasting with the naked emotion in his voice, "I ask you now, before these witnesses, to do me the honor of becoming my wife, not because of any wager or obligation, but because I have discovered in you qualities I had ceased to believe existed in this cynical world." The portrait gallery had fallen so silent that the distant strains of the orchestra seemed to come from another world entirely. Every eye fixed upon Eliza, whose composure momentarily faltered at this unexpected public declaration. The dress that had once symbolized her humiliation now seemed to take on a different significance, its ivory folds catching the light as she stood at the center of a moment that would define not only her future, but potentially shift the rigid boundaries of society itself. Victoria's face had drained of color, her carefully orchestrated scheme to humiliate her cousin having backfired spectacularly. Lord Worthington's mouth had fallen slightly open, his financial concerns suddenly replaced by the astonishing prospect of his daughter's elevation to Duchess. But it was the Dowager Duchess, who had appeared silently in the doorway, whose reaction Eliza sought. The formidable matriarch inclined her head in a subtle gesture that conveyed both approval and a challenge. The acknowledgement that while she welcomed Eliza's acceptance, she would expect her future daughter-in-law to be equal to the position's demands. Drawing a steadying breath, Eliza looked down at Sebastian, still kneeling before her in defiance of every social protocol that governed their world. In his eyes, she saw not calculation or temporary infatuation, but something she had never expected to find directed at her: genuine admiration mingled with tender regard. The journey from cruel wager to this moment had transformed them both in ways neither could have anticipated. "Sebastian," she began, her voice clear enough to carry to every eager listener, "when you challenged me with that dress, you believed you were highlighting my inadequacies." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some shifting uncomfortably at this direct reference to the scandal that had circulated through gossip channels for months. "Instead," Eliza continued, her confidence growing with each word, "you provided the opportunity for me to demonstrate qualities I had always possessed but never had occasion to prove: determination, resourcefulness, and the courage to pursue dignity rather than retreat in shame." Without breaking his gaze, Eliza slowly removed her left glove, a gesture laden with significance that elicited another wave of whispers. "I accept your proposal," she declared, extending her bare hand toward him. "Not as the fulfillment of a wager, but as the beginning of a partnership founded on mutual respect and authentic regard." Sebastian's face transformed with genuine joy as he slipped the sapphire ring onto her finger, its unusual setting a fitting symbol of their unconventional path to this moment. As he rose to his feet, still holding her hand, the Dowager Duchess stepped forward, effectively silencing any potential disapproving murmurs with her authoritative presence. "I believe," she announced, her voice brooking no contradiction, "that the traditional blessing should be followed by a celebration. The orchestra has been instructed to continue, and champagne awaits in the ballroom." Her pronouncement served as both validation of the engagement and a clear signal that the ton should consider the match a fait accompli, worthy of congratulations rather than criticism. As Sebastian led his newly betrothed back toward the ballroom, they passed Lady Victoria, whose earlier triumph had curdled into bitter disappointment. "I underestimated you, cousin," she murmured, low enough for only Eliza to hear, the admission clearly costing her considerable pride. Eliza paused, remembering the years of slights and condescension she had endured from her beautiful relative. In this moment of victory, she found unexpected compassion rising within her, perhaps the first true test of the grace her new position would require. "Many have," she replied simply, without malice. "I hope in time you'll come to know me better." Sebastian's hand tightened around hers in silent approval as they continued forward, entering the ballroom now transformed into a sea of curious faces. The orchestra struck up a waltz at a subtle signal from the Duchess, and Sebastian led Eliza to the center of the floor, the assembled aristocracy parting before them like water. As they began to dance, Sebastian drew her closer than propriety strictly allowed, the intimacy of his proximity sending a flutter through Eliza's chest. "Are you prepared for the challenges ahead?" he asked quietly, his breath warm against her ear as they turned beneath the chandeliers. "The scrutiny, the expectations, the responsibility that comes with the title." Eliza's lips curved into a confident smile as they moved in perfect harmony across the polished floor. "I remade an impossible dress to fit a form it was never intended for," she reminded him. "I believe I can manage to reshape other expectations similarly." Her gentle teasing drew an answering smile from Sebastian, the last of his reserve melting away as he gazed at the remarkable woman who had challenged every preconception he had once held sacred. Around them, the ton watched with avid curiosity as the story of the cruel wager visibly transformed into an unexpected romance before their eyes, a tale that would be recounted in drawing rooms and at dinner parties throughout the season and beyond. What had begun as a moment of aristocratic disdain had culminated in a triumph of character over circumstance, of substance over superficial judgment. As dawn's first light began to filter through the ballroom's high windows, it illuminated not just a newly engaged couple, but the possibility that perhaps in rare and exceptional cases, society's rigid hierarchies might bend to accommodate genuine worth. 2 years later, the Duchess of Ravenscroft stood at the head of the grand staircase, overseeing final preparations for what had become London's most anticipated annual event, the Ravenscroft Scholarship Ball. Beneath crystal chandeliers, footmen arranged tables where displays of academic and artistic achievements from young women of all social backgrounds would later be exhibited. The event, conceived by Eliza during her first year as Duchess, had scandalized traditionalists, but captivated progressive elements of society by offering educational opportunities to talented girls regardless of their family connections or financial circumstances. Sebastian appeared beside her, placing a gentle hand at the small of her back as he surveyed the transformed ballroom. "Lady Victoria has sent her regrets again," he remarked, amusement colouring his tone, "though I understand her daughter has submitted a rather remarkable mathematical proof for consideration." Eliza smiled, satisfaction warming her expression. Her once cruel cousin had initially rejected all overtures of reconciliation, but the unexpected academic brilliance of Victoria's middle daughter had gradually softened her stance as she recognized the opportunities Eliza's initiative might provide for a girl whose intellect outshone her modest dowry. In the East Wing, converted into a combination library and study center, where scholarship recipients could access resources otherwise beyond their reach, the Dowager Duchess sat in animated conversation with Lord William Worthington. The unlikely friendship that had developed between Sebastian's formidable mother and Eliza's formerly defeated father had surprised everyone, including their children. United by their shared love of Renaissance literature and mutual pride in Eliza's accomplishments, they had become collaborative authors of a well-received monograph on obscure Italian texts. Lord Worthington's expertise, long overshadowed by financial struggles, had flourished under the Dowager's patronage and his daughter's unwavering belief in his abilities. The transformation in his bearing, now straight-backed and confident where once he had been bowed by shame, mirrored the broader changes Eliza's presence had catalyzed throughout the once austere Ravenscroft household. As twilight descended and guests began to arrive, Eliza retreated briefly to her private chambers to check on the evening's most precious attendee. In a beautifully appointed nursery adjoining her dressing room, a dark-haired infant dozed peacefully in an ornate cradle, his tiny features a perfect blend of his parents. The young heir to the dukedom, barely 3 months old, had already become the center of a household that had once functioned with rigid formality, but now embraced the occasional chaos his existence introduced. Eliza gently touched his downy head, marveling at the journey that had led from public humiliation to this moment of profound contentment. A soft knock announced Sebastian's arrival, his expression softening as it always did when he beheld his wife and son together. "The guests are assembling," he murmured, coming to stand beside her, though none so magnificent as those already present in this room. His arm encircled her waist as they shared a moment of quiet appreciation for the family they had created, one founded not on cold social calculation, but on the authentic connection they had forged through challenge and mutual respect. Later that evening, as the scholarship recipients were presented to enthusiastic applause from assembled guests, Sebastian found himself observing his wife with undisguised admiration. Eliza moved through the crowd with natural grace, her intelligence and warmth drawing people to her with a magnetism that had nothing to do with her title and everything to do with her character. The notorious dress that had once been the instrument of her intended humiliation now rested in a glass case in the portrait gallery, preserved as a tangible reminder of how cruelty had unintentionally provided the opportunity for transformation. Beside it hung a commissioned portrait of the Duchess in her favorite blue gown, her expression serene but determined, a book open in her lap symbolizing the value of knowledge over mere appearance. Sebastian often found himself pausing before this pairing when navigating the long gallery, reflecting on how close he had come to missing the extraordinary partnership that now defined his life, all because he had once been shallow enough to judge worth by conventional standards rather than character. As midnight approached, Sebastian stood at the edge of the ballroom, observing his wife as she concluded a conversation with a government minister whose initial skepticism about female education had gradually yielded to Eliza's persuasive advocacy. When she turned and caught his eye across the crowded space, the connection between them remained as powerful as it had been during their first dance as an engaged couple. She made her way toward him, accepting congratulations and well wishes as she moved through the admiring crowd. "Another successful evening," Sebastian commented when she reached his side, his fingers interlacing with hers in a gesture that had become habitual. "Though I believe your most impressive transformation remains your first." Eliza raised an eyebrow, the confidence that had always existed within her now visible to all the world. "The dress?" she asked. Sebastian shook his head, raising her hand to place a kiss upon her knuckles, unconcerned by the public nature of the gesture. "My heart," he corrected softly. As the orchestra began a waltz, the same one they had danced to on the night of his proposal, Sebastian led his Duchess onto the floor, the glittering assemblage parting for them just as they had 2 years prior. But where once they had moved beneath scrutiny and speculation, they now danced surrounded by respect and genuine admiration, living proof that true value, once recognized, could transform not only individual lives, but perhaps in small but meaningful ways, society itself. Dear listener, in a world that too often measures worth by appearance or circumstance, remember that your true value lies in qualities others cannot immediately see: your determination, your intellect, your capacity for growth in the face of cruelty. Like Eliza, you may find that the very challenges meant to diminish you become instead the catalyst for revealing your hidden strengths. And perhaps in that revelation, you'll discover not only your own worth, but the rare individuals who possess the wisdom to recognize and cherish it. For sometimes, the path to being truly seen begins with the courage to stand tall in the face of those who would have you shrink away. This is not merely a tale of romance, but of personal vindication, a reminder that in the end, character outshines any dress, no matter how finely made.